November 21st, 2025. A Russian tanker slips into the Caribbean carrying 70,000 tons of fuel to Venezuela, a bold move against the U.S. Navy. The Seahorse crew thinks it's just another dark fleet run. They have no idea a 9,000-ton Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Stockdale is lying in wait, ready to turn a routine delivery into a financial and geopolitical nightmare. Venezuela's struggling oil industry desperately needed naphtha to survive, so they turned to the Seahorse, a Russian dark fleet tanker that had more sanctions than CVS receipts. The ship's fatal mistake, and one common to the dark fleet used by Russia and its sanctioning allies, was the belief that simply turning off its AIS transponder would be enough to disappear from the world's radar screens. In civilian waters, the trick might create a temporary blackout. But to the military eye of U.S. satellites, radar networks, and intelligence analysts, the sudden disappearance of AIS was not invisibility. It was, on the contrary, a bright red flag warning of suspicious activity. Rather than concealment, the act itself confirmed everything the U.S. had been waiting for and inadvertently gave the USS Stockdale the perfect coordinates to end the game. Their stealth trick is basically a giant neon sign that flashes, "Catch me." The Russian captain spent the next hour staring at a green radar screen, convinced he'd outsmarted the Americans. He saw nothing. No destroyers, no aircraft, just empty ocean. But he wasn't looking at empty space. He was looking at a masterpiece of deception called EMCON Alpha. Now, to understand why the Russian captain was about to have the worst night of his life, you have to understand what Emission Control Alpha actually means for a modern U.S. warship. It's not just turning off the lights and radio. It is a complete electronic lockdown. The Stockdale had silenced its powerful SPY-1D radar, the heart of the Aegis system, its primary communication links, and even its navigational radar. The ship was running completely dark, using only passive sensors to listen to the Seahorse's noisy diesel engines like a predator listening to a heartbeat in the dark. But simply hiding wasn't enough. The Stockdale's tactical action officer wanted to manipulate the Russians, not just ambush them. This is where the game went from hide-and-seek to psychological warfare. They engaged the AN/SLQ-32 V6 electronic warfare suite, or the Slick-32 as the sailors call it. This system is less of a defensive tool and more of a digital artist. It can analyze, jam, and crucially spoof enemy sensors. It doesn't just block a picture, it paints a new one. Instead of hiding completely, the Stockdale began projecting a carefully crafted ghost signature. The Slick-32 manipulated the electromagnetic spectrum to feed the Seahorse's radar a lie. It created a faint, non-threatening blip that appeared to be moving away from the intercept zone heading north. To the Russian sensors, this 200-ton guided missile destroyer looked exactly like a small, harmless Coast Guard cutter ending its patrol and heading home for the night. It was a masterclass in deception. It was the tactical equivalent of a poker player showing you a pair of twos while hiding a royal flush under the table. The Russian captain saw the cutter moving away, convinced himself the path was clear, and took the bait. He ordered a course correction to slip through the gap he thought existed. He turned his massive tanker south, thinking he had just outsmarted the U.S. Navy. He hadn't. He had just steered his ship directly into the kill box. The moment the Seahorse committed to the turn, the atmosphere inside the Stockdale's Combat Information Center shifted from stalking to hunting. The tactical action officer gave a single command that unleashed the beast. "Drop the mask, all ahead flank." Deep inside the destroyer's hull, 4 General Electric LM2500 gas turbines, basically jet engines from a Boeing 747 strapped to propeller shafts, roared to life. These engines are capable of generating over 100,000 shaft horsepower instantly. The Stockdale didn't just accelerate, it lunged. The bow rose out of the water as the 200-ton warship surged from a silent drift to over 30 knots in minutes. The harmless cutter signal vanished, replaced by the terrifying high-power reality of an Aegis destroyer lighting up its active sensors. On the Seahorse, panic set in instantly. The radar screen, previously empty, suddenly lit up with a contact closing at impossible speed. The distance was collapsing 10 miles, 5 miles, 2 miles. The Americans weren't just intercepting, they were charging. The Stockdale executed a maneuver known as a silent intercept. The goal isn't to fire weapons, it's to occupy the same physical space as the enemy so aggressively that they are forced to move. The destroyer cut a razor-sharp angle across the Seahorse's bow, closing until only 500 feet of water separated a multi-billion-dollar warship from a tanker filled with flammable liquid. In the vastness of the ocean, this isn't close. This is sharing a business card. But here is the genius part. This wasn't just reckless driving, it was weaponized law. Under the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, a vessel approaching from starboard has the right of way. The Stockdale deliberately engineered the intercept to place itself in that legally dominant position. The tactical officer on the Stockdale wasn't just pointing a ship. He was pointing at page 32 of the rulebook. The Russian captain did the math instantly and maintained course. He would T-bone a U.S. warship and be legally at fault for the entire international incident. He'd lose his ship, his cargo, his career, and likely his freedom. It was a checkmate using nothing but geometry and bureaucracy. He panicked, slammed the rudder hard over, and ran back toward Cuba like he'd just seen a ghost, which technically he had. But smugglers are stubborn, or maybe just terrified of the phone call they'd have to make to Moscow. So the Seahorse turned around and tried again, and then again. The captain was betting on fatigue. He thought, surely this destroyer has to refuel or the crew needs to sleep. That was his second fatal mistake. He assumed he was fighting a ship. In reality, he was fighting a network. This is where the U.S. Navy stopped playing tag and started playing 5D chess. While the Stockdale pulled back to reset the trap, they handed the baton to the sky. A P-8 Poseidon drifted into position overhead, slipping into a flight route that looked exactly like the routine patrols it flies across the Caribbean every single day. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. The Russian trackers, it was just another blip doing what Poseidons always do. That is until the Seahorse's crew finally glanced upward and caught the unmistakable silhouette slicing above the clouds. A moment of stunned silence washed over the bridge before someone muttered the only reaction that fit the moment. Ooh, hello. Because by the time they noticed it, the Poseidon had already been watching them for miles, quiet, patient, shiat, and impossible to shake. If the Seahorse thought turning off AIS made them invisible, this was the moment they realized the opposite: the U.S. hadn't lost them. The U.S. had been waiting. This isn't just an airplane. It's a flying data center that costs $175 million and can spot a periscope in a storm from 30,000 feet using its AN/APY-10 radar. It started orbiting the Seahorse, mapping every electronic emission, every radio burst, creating a digital fingerprint so precise we could probably tell what the crew was having for lunch. And because the U.S. had been tracking this tanker long before it reached the Caribbean, the P-8 wasn't working alone. It was part of a coordinated net that had already been closing in for days. But the real psychological breaker came from below. The U.S. Navy had quietly positioned an asset exactly for this moment, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine assigned to shadow any sanctioned vessel attempting to run the blockade. This sub had likely been stalking them in absolute silence for 400 miles, waiting for the Seahorse to make its predictable invisible run. And once the Poseidon confirmed the tanker had nowhere left to go, the submarine finally broke its vow of silence. It didn't launch a weapon. It didn't surface. It simply pinged them. One single pulse of active sonar. The ping sound was like a flashlight shining on the face of a thief hiding behind a bush. No one was caught right away, but everyone understood. Oh, game over, man. By the third attempt, the Russian captain realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't looking for a gap in the line. There was no line. He was inside a sphere of total dominance. Satellites watching from space, P-8s tracking from the clouds, a destroyer blocking the surface, and a nuclear predator waiting in the basement. They were in a surveillance cage so tight they couldn't change their socks without the Pentagon updating a spreadsheet. Defeated by physics, geometry, and pure anxiety, the Seahorse gave up. Because the truth is, this tanker was never built to outrun anything. It was a 30-year-old rust bucket hauling 70,000 tons of flammable cargo with engines that struggled to hit double-digit knots on a good day. It wasn't armed, it had no escorts, no radar worth mentioning, and no training to counter a coordinated air-surface submarine trap. Against that, the U.S. was operating with perfect situational awareness satellites above a P-8 in the sky, a destroyer on the surface, and a submarine directly underneath them. The Seahorse never stood a chance, not because the crew was incompetent, but because they were trying to sneak past the most advanced surveillance network on Earth, using tactics that stopped working sometime around 1998. So cornered by technology, boxed in by ocean geography, and paralyzed by the knowledge that one wrong move could turn them into a fireball, the captain did the only rational thing left. He killed the engines and went dead in the water. The Stockdale had just won a naval engagement without even taking the safety off a single weapon. That wasn't just a victory, that was a flex. What's the big takeaway from this little adventure in the Caribbean? The Seahorse incident wasn't a battle. The Stockdale wouldn't have even needed to get within visual range. From 150 nautical miles out, its Aegis combat system would have tracked the frigate, classified it as hostile, and recommended a firing solution before the Venezuelan captain had even finished his morning coffee. The first line of defense would be an SM-6 missile. This isn't just a missile, it's a 25-foot-long Mach 3.5 quarterback that can hit a moving target the size of a small car from over the horizon. It has its own onboard radar, allowing it to hunt independently. The Venezuelan frigate would have been a cloud of vapor before its crew even heard the alarm bells. And if by some miracle they survived that, the Stockdale has defensive layers like an onion. For medium-range threats, it has the evolved Sea Sparrow missile, a smaller hyper-agile semi hyper-agile missile designed to shoot down incoming anti-ship missiles. For close-in work, there's the 5-inch naval gun, which can fire a 70-pound shell over 13 nautical miles 20 times a minute. And for the last-ditch get-off-my-lawn defense, there's the Phalanx CIWS, a robotic Gatling gun that spits out 4,500 rounds of tungsten per minute to shred anything that gets too personal. It was a fight the Venezuelans couldn't possibly win, and the U.S. Navy knew it. But the real lesson here isn't about firepower, it's about information dominance. The entire operation was a brutal mismatch of awareness. The Russians had a single isolated data point, their own radar screen, which we were actively feeding with lies. The U.S. Navy, on the other hand, had a complete multi-layered 3D picture of the entire battle space. They were fusing data from satellites in geosynchronous orbit from the P-8's high-altitude sensors, from the submarine's underwater acoustics, and from the Stockdale's own passive systems. They were playing checkers on a wooden board. We were playing 5D chess with an AI co-processor and a live satellite feed. The economic calculus is just as brutal. The Russians risked a multi-million-dollar ship and a $50 million cargo of naphtha. The U.S. Navy risked a few thousand gallons of jet fuel for the P-8 and some extra wear on the Stockdale's engines. It was an asymmetric bet that the Russians were guaranteed to lose. The Seahorse eventually turned around and sailed home 70,000 tons of fuel, poorer and infinitely wiser. The incident served as a stark reminder to every Shadow Fleet captain out there: don't mistake American patience for weakness. We don't always have it to be the loudest guy in the room. Sometimes the most intimidating thing you can do is just stand there calmly knowing you can win anytime you want. It's the quiet confidence that comes from holding all the cards. And if you want to see more examples of how the U.S. Navy uses superior technology and sheer brainpower to keep the world's oceans in check, make sure you subscribe to Navy Vector. Let me know in the comments. Which tactic do you think was the most brilliant? The electronic ghost ship or the weaponized rulebook?